Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a good start to your week. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the first reading, and I'll be addressing the first two reading questions from this week. So I think most of you did pretty well on this one. I feel like this is one of the more straightforward readings, but there are some things that I want to highlight. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so first of all, we'll start by talking about Aristotle's three types of speeches and talk about why she only chose two speeches. Then we'll discuss a few things about her opinions on these speeches, and I'll give you some suggestions on speeches you could watch to apply this to current speeches. Typically we do this in class, but sometimes when I post videos with other videos in them, they get deleted by YouTube, so I won't be doing that on this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to say, many of you were correct in what you thought the author was trying to do. So yes, what she was trying to do, she's trying to better understand how Barack Obama utilizes different types of speeches depending on the situation. But more importantly, what she was looking at was specifically the first year, maybe a little less than a year of Barack Obama's presidency. And she wanted to do this because she felt like, you know, other new presidents could learn a bit more from this. And she also felt like because it was so early in Barack Obama's presidency, that he might be able to learn how he could be a little bit more effective. It's interesting because, you know, especially during his candidacy, his first candidacy, so many people said what a great speaker he was, and people still recognize him as a pretty great speaker, but she's finding a lot of flaws, and maybe surprising flaws, in some of the ways that he chose to communicate. So that's what we'll be getting into in just a little bit of detail. So, all right. So I've answered your reading question number one. Reading question number two, I'd asked you to tell me which types of speeches she decided to use and like what those are, like explain them. And you're right, she chose to use epidictic and deliberative. I want to make sure I also define forensics and explain why she chose not to use forensics. So forensic is a type of speech from Aristotle. He sort of created this idea, as well as the other two, that he classified as sort of a speech about judgment, a speech about things that happened in the past, right? So think about this. I mean, typically this is happening in like a courtroom or something like that. It doesn't always have to be in the courtroom. But, you know, I think she chose not to use this one because we don't see presidents give a whole lot of speeches about these types of judgments, right? This would be more appropriate for maybe a Supreme Court judge, obviously. Or maybe, you know, if you're going through impeachment processes, which is what's going on right now, you might see some speeches about judgments from people like Nancy Pelosi. But typically we don't see that. And so I think that's why she chose to sort of stay away from that one, because it's rare. But the two that she chose to stick with were epidictic and deliberative. Epidictic, think about this as like it's on the present, what's happening right now in this moment. It's typically a speech that is to honor or celebrate, or it's, you know, it could happen at a graduation ceremony. It could also happen at a funeral, right? So yeah, if we connect it with time, it's something that's happening right now. And then finally, deliberative, you've probably guessed it right now, is on things that are going to happen in the future. And this typically calls the audience to respond in one way or another. Like, it doesn't mean that when I'm giving a deliberative speech, then I'm going to ask you to then engage with me, right? Even though that would be somewhat invitational. Instead, it means that like maybe after I give a speech, you might leave, and then you'll be thinking about how you feel about this future action, right? But it might call you to then post your own speech on YouTube or whatever it might be. So again, deliberative is about things that are going to happen in the future. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the speeches that she looked at. I know she looked at like, she gave like 5 different suggestions in the article, and we're going to look at a few of them. So the first speech we'll look at is the inaugural speech. And this particular speech, so she's typically like, she starts by thinking about whether these speeches are epidictic or deliberative and whether they should have been. She's saying that, of course, probably not surprising that an inaugural speech should be epidictic, right? In other words, it should be marking like, I am starting my presidency. Here I am, right? She's definitely does not think that this should be deliberative, because she feels as if a president who has just had a pretty rough campaign needs to show all sides of the United States, all parts of them, that he or she is going to lead all of them, right? And so being deliberative would be somewhat problematic, or really problematic for an inaugural speech. The thing that she has a problem with here, she definitely thinks that it's not as epidictic as it could have been. Her primary focus is that it didn't have enough digestive statements. So what she means by that is, like, there weren't some sort of sound bites that we could take away from his speech, that then we could sort of tweet out and everyone would sort of, like, it might go viral or something like that. She doesn't talk about it like that, but I think she's looking for these things that are really catchy that people can sort of stick and hold on to. And for whatever reason, he didn't have those. So she finds that to be problematic, and she wishes that he would have done it a little bit more effectively. All right, so once again, not as epidictic as it should have been. All right, so another one that she talks about is the BP oil spill. So this one, when she's talking about the situation and how he should have responded, she's saying that because he took like something like 50 days to respond to the oil spill, and he's responding to it from the Oval Office, there's all sorts of problems with what's going on here, right? So she's saying that, you know, this sort of Oval Office vibe, way too late, and just the way that he chooses to deliver it is giving more of an epidictic feel, which might have been appropriate had it have been the day after, right? Like, this is something that had happened, like, you know, I'm thinking of the families that were affected, blah, 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 right? That would be effective then. But because he waited so long, she's thinking that we as a society would expect something a little bit different, especially because Barack Obama ran his campaign, at least partially, on being sort of the environmentally concerned candidate. And so she's thinking that if you're waiting this long, you might as well just go bold and be deliberative. Right? And that's something that she feels like could have been helpful, and it could have actually pushed Congress to start trying to solve maybe not just the oil spill solution, or the oil spill, but also sort of what's going on environmentally throughout the United States connected to oil. So I think obviously he would have been criticized on the other side if he would have been deliberative, because maybe people would say it was not an appropriate thing to do. But I do think it's interesting that she's calling for more deliberation here. Yeah. But, you know, you'll get criticisms no matter what you do. That's what makes rhetoric fun, right? The other thing that's really important here is that, you know, again, waiting so long to give this speech, he could have done it in a different place that would have shown he was more concerned. Like, for example, actually go to the location in the South, in Louisiana, I think Louisiana, to sort of say, like, I'm here, I'm concerned, we need to do something about this. Right? So there's all sorts of problems with this one, but most importantly, connected to the terms, it was too epidictic and not deliberative enough. All right, the next one is the eulogy in Tucson, Arizona. This eulogy happened after a child was killed at a local community event where a Congress member was also in attendance, and the Congress member had gotten shot and almost died. And in fact, some reports said that she had died. And some other people were injured as well. So Barack Obama is here to give this eulogy, and he goes to Tucson, the location. So, you know, check, at least like he got part of the location right here. Maybe learned his lesson from the oil spill. But what Jameson is trying to say with this one is, yes, of course it should have been epidictic, but the problem is that he gave it in sort of this big stadium. And so, yes, going to Tucson was cool, but the stadium probably wasn't, especially because the way people were responding to his speech, like if you watch it, you can hear people like, "Whoa, Obama!" sort of shouting in a way that seems like it's almost like a campaign stop. And so I don't know if she comes out and says this, but I think like that sort of support that he's getting gives off either a more deliberative vibe or the wrong type of epidictic vibe, right? So this should have been a day of mourning, and instead people were like yelling and shouting, and there were thousands of people in attendance, right? And those people were sort of throwing the president off. It seemed as if he didn't expect people to be interrupting him as he was talking, which I guess isn't surprising, because if you're at a eulogy, you don't expect that. But also when there are thousands of people, maybe you do. Anyways, so again, it probably could have been more effective if he had chosen a smaller location, maybe a church, made it a private ceremony. Yeah, and that would have made it the proper type of epidictic. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about is the S&P downgrade. And if you don't know about this happening, please look it up, get some context. They give you a little bit in the reading. But what happened here is that people were starting to panic that we had been downgraded. The United States had been downgraded. And so Barack Obama went, let's see, went to the media, and he tried to address this by being like, look, don't worry, like it's all going to be fine. And he gave some shout outs to like Warren Buffett. And then he tacked on like some things about the war in Afghanistan at the end. And what she says about this particular speech is like, sometimes giving a speech isn't the thing that you should be doing, right? Sometimes that the situation does not call for a speech. Instead, it calls for deliberation, maybe behind closed doors, right? So what she's saying is, because it sort of seemed like he was off his game and he didn't deliver it very effectively, and he added in some other stuff that had nothing to do with this thing that people thought was really important, he could have maybe spent some time with Congress and maybe actually did like a photo op with members of Congress to show that they're doing something about this. And so the media could have utilized those photos and captioned it, in whatever way they will with their little spin. But that would have been better than what he had done. It actually created a little bit more panic and confusion than was necessary at this particular time. So again, this one was probably, it leaned more towards epidictic, saying that it happened, but we didn't need any sort of speech at all, right? We actually needed him to be doing something about it. That would have made us feel better. So typically in class, we actually watch some speeches from President Trump, especially because we look at like the first year, just like she did. And we look at things like some of his major speeches, like after the Charlottesville incident. We look at speeches after the Las Vegas shooting. We look at speeches after Hurricane Harvey. And we try to sort of apply some of the things that Jameson applied to Obama to Trump. And of course, they're two different people. There's going to be differences. But you'll see that they've made some of the same mistakes, which is somewhat interesting to sort of watch. So I guess they're not reading these political comm journals, right? Okay, anyways, not many of us do, I guess. So hopefully by the end of this particular video, you understand those three types of speeches and why she only chose to use two, and you at least get her opinions about the speeches and why she felt one way or another about them. And then you can apply her analysis to current speeches if you have the time or interest. All right, so that's it for this video. I know I'm reminding you of this in the next video too, but don't forget about your paper that's due this week, and I'm always available for questions if you have them. All right, have a great week.